okay, that's it. I'm dead. My body is dead. And then in a split second, it was like everything started to move really fast. It was that freeze frame completely dissolved. Everything started to move. I started to also feel emotions and pain. I had an awareness of all of that. And then it was like in a nanosecond, I severed my remaining connection with my body down below on the street. And I let go of the life. It was a very fast decision. And then it was like a cord snapped. And I felt that I moved at great speed away from Earth, through the sky, into the stratosphere. And then everything went black. And so what I had just described probably just took maybe 3-4 minutes. It took very short. But in my experience of that expanded awareness, that out of body, it felt like it had lasted much longer. So there was already distortion of time. And so everything was black. And then the first recollection I have of re-emerging into some kind of consciousness was a sensation of floating in space. And that was very beautiful. It was very peaceful. And I remember that I thought, wow, this feels so familiar. I think I've done this before. And as I was floating, I also realized that I was experiencing my own immortality. I remember I was floating in the cosmos. I have an awareness that there is light. I also had an awareness that space was not black. I remember it as a sort of velvety blue, very deep, very soft. And so it was almost a sensual experience of floating there and feeling very peaceful. And I enjoyed it, and I thought it was a very interesting experience. And I already thought that it brought back memories, that I had done that before, that I had been in the cosmos amongst the stars and the planets before. And then everything faded back to black. And then when my consciousness re-emerges, the first thing I become aware of is a swirling golden infinity sign, like a number 8, sort of forever swirling, moving. And it was very large from a human perspective. And it felt like my consciousness, that my spirit was somehow suspended above this swirling, rotating infinity sign. And that lasted for a moment. And then what I remember is that I was shown intimate scenes from the life that I had just departed. And I remember one scene in particular where I was taken to a moment where I was a teenager, 13, 14 years old, and I was having an argument with my mother. And as that scene unfolds itself in my awareness, what was so curious was that I was not experiencing it through my own perspective as the teenager, but I was taken inside my mom. So I almost re-witnessed, I re-experienced that whole argument, that whole sort of painful interaction between us through her perspective, through her eyes. And in that moment, I felt her pain. I felt her frustration. I felt her anxiety. And that really moved me. It impressed me very much. And I thought, how quaint is this? Like, wow, this is pain that I caused her. And it really left me with a big emotional impression. And some other scenes also emerged. And I also recall that I remember witnessing scenes from that life as a tiny girl, as a toddler of maybe 2 years old, which of course from a human physiological perspective, we don't have any active memory of. So that was also kind of magical. And then the life scenes dissolve. And what I remember was that then it was like I experienced another expansion of my consciousness. And I am aware that it really opened up all the other realms. I was taken into all these other dimensions. It really was like an opening. That's the best way to describe it. What I realized, what my soul, what my spirit realized was that I had more than that life. It was an excitement, almost a relief. I thought, but I have lived many lives before. And I also had this sort of perspective, this view into future timelines. And I realized that I would live more lifetimes. And not only as a human, I was also aware that I existed in many other forms and lifetimes and also other human forms simultaneously. And that was a very overwhelmingly profound experience because it sort of liberates you from that small mind, that small life, that one singular life. So that was very liberating, very exhilarating to have that as a knowing, to know that that was true, a quantum truth. And at the same time, realizing that actually you are always existing, not only in those lives, but as consciousness. And that was also left an incredibly deep experience on me. And then all of a sudden, there was a voice. I became aware of a voice. And that voice said something along the lines of, you can't stay. You have to go back. And when I understood the impact of those words, of that voice, I panicked. And then what happened is what I often describe as the bargaining with God, telepathically, of course. And I remember my soul, my spirit, begging and pleading with this invisible force, this invisible divine consciousness. And I pleaded for my life. I said, I am home. I am ecstatically happy. Please let me stay. And it didn't really engage with me, with my soul. At least I have no memory, no recall of that. And at some point I just heard it repeat its command. It said, no, you can't stay. You are going back. And from there again, there was no memory. There was a fade to black. And then I reawoke in an intensive care unit with my heart tied up to a ventilator machine where I was on life support.